everybody. Good afternoon. Welcome to the live stream. So, we have another beautiful sunny day here in Los Angeles. I do have the windows open, and hopefully, it will remain quiet and we won't have any interruptions. But if anything happens, just leave a comment and let me know, and I could close up the windows. But my mic is supposed to be directional and only picking up noise that's right in front of it. So hopefully, even if there is, a car goes by or something outside, hopefully that will get filtered out of the live stream. So welcome. So we're going to pick up with the forms, accessible forms, where we left off last time. So we're working our way through this forms tutorial from the Web Accessibility Initiative. And last time, if I scroll back up, so the last live stream that we did, we covered using labels, we covered grouping controls, we covered form instructions, and we also covered most of validating input. We're going to pick up with just kind of the more complex, I guess I should say, rather than complicated, the more complex validation that was kind of at the bottom of this lesson. And then we'll move along and take a look at user notifications and multi-page forms and custom controls for today. And then I was thinking that next time we could probably dig into semantic HTML a little bit. So if that sounds good to you, let me know. Or if you have another topic in mind, something about accessibility that you're really wondering about and would like to know about, I'd be happy to consider it for a live stream topic. All right, but let's dig in here. So I'm going to scroll back down. So we have this section, which I think is the last section in this validating input section of the tutorial, which is letting us know that we have a semantic way of validating user input using the pattern attribute on inputs. So if you have been building websites for a long time like me, then you will remember that once upon a time, the only way to do this was either to handle it in your backend code, and then when the user would try to submit the form, the page would refresh, but they would get some kind of error message showing on the front end to let them know that there was some kind of problem with their form. Or a little bit later on, we introduced being able to do that with JavaScript. And there is like a jet or a helicopter or something flying overhead. Okay, I think that's gone. I don't know if that picked up on the call or not, so apologies if it did. All right. So they have an example here of license plates in Germany, which apparently follow a very consistent pattern of 3 letters, followed by a space, 2 to 4 random letters, another space, and then 1 to 4 random numbers. So we can pass a pattern to this pattern attribute of the form input to clarify that. So here's what that would look like. So we're going to say 1 to 3 letters. So here are the letters that we're including, and we're including some special characters there because it is German and not English. So we've got some characters that we need to include, and we're saying that there are 1 to 3 of those. And then we have a space, and then we have 2 to 4 random letters. All right, so here it looks like we're not doing the special characters, but we have between 2 and 4 of those random letters. And then another space, so we have a space there, and 1 to 4 random numbers. So we're saying 0 to 9 are acceptable there, and between 1 and 4 of those numbers. So if we type something else in that field, we will get a validation message letting us know that we didn't follow the format. And that is all without us having to write any special code checking the format on the, in our backend code, if it's PHP or if it's Ruby or whatever we happen to be using to run the backend of our website, right? Like, we don't have to write anything there, and we don't have to write any JavaScript to get this special handling. So they do have a note here to be forgiving of different input formats. And this is a good case where I think maybe that pattern, this pattern attribute might not always be the best solution. A good example would be a phone number field where some people would type a phone number field with their country code. Some people would type it without. Some people would put parentheses, right, for an American phone number, right? Some people would put parentheses around the first 3 digits because that's a pretty common formatting thing. Other people wouldn't bother doing that. Some people are going to type hyphens in the middle of their phone number. Other people will type spaces. People might type dots. They might not type anything at all. They might just put all the numbers all run together as one number. And it's ideal if you can make your code robust enough to handle all of those different possibilities. And I see that I forgot to tell my time tracker to stop. So let me just pause that right now. Disable time tracking for 1 hour. All right. I missed that on my setup list today. Okay. So it is a good idea to be accommodating of as many different formats as you can. If you use that pattern attribute in the HTML, it is going to be very strict. If you say it has to be 3 digits, then a hyphen, then 3 digits, then a hyphen, then 4 digits, it is going to enforce that everybody type their phone number in that way, even though that might not be how everybody thinks about their phone number or how people prefer to format their phone number. Generally, as long as you got 10 digits for a US phone number, you're good, right? As long as you've got 10 digits there, you can pretty much count on that being a phone number, no matter how people type it in. And you should be able to handle, pulling out those 10 digits from whatever people happen to type in and validating them and making sure that you've got 10 digits without requiring the user to enter a very specific format. If you have technical constraints and for some reason you have to require a very specific format, just be sure that it's really clear in the instructions for that form field exactly what that format is so that you don't end up frustrating users. All right. So they make a note that client-side validation is generally a better experience, right? Because if we do server-side validation, then we typically have to submit the form, wait for the page to refresh, and then get back what our errors were. Where if we do client-side validation, it can be pretty much instantaneous. Like as soon as we, sometimes it happens not even when you try to submit the form, right? But like as you fill out the fields, like as you type into each field, it will validate the input. Do be careful about that because it is frustrating and confusing for users sometimes when you do something like this phone number field has to be 10 characters and they start typing and they type, 1, 2 characters, because they can't type 10 characters at once, right? And as soon as they type 1 character, I'm sure you've seen this, an error message pops up and says, this phone number needs to be 10 characters. And it's like, wow, like chill out. I need a second to type the 10 characters. And you're alerting a screen reader user, oh, there's an error, and they're in the middle of typing it. So try to avoid that situation. Just be aware of that and try to avoid that as much as possible where you're validating as someone types, but then throwing errors when they're just not done typing yet, right? Like you're saying, oh, that's an invalid email address. Well, it's just like, yeah, I didn't type the @ symbol yet. Like, calm down. I just need a second to type it in. So try to be aware of like being accommodating to users, right? And then we also want to give users a way to confirm information that they've typed in. So maybe we want to show it to them on a secondary screen. Maybe we want to create a summary of like, okay, here's what you entered in the form. Is this what you meant to tell us? And then give a way for them to go back and edit that. That's always really useful. And then, of course, we want to, whenever possible, provide a way to undo so that if I do happen, I just get click copy and I submit the form and then I realize there's a typo in my phone number, there should be a way for me to adjust that, especially in cases where that's really important information, right? Like I just submitted my taxes and I typed my income in wrong. Like that's a really serious problem. And I should have had a chance, number one, to check that data before the form submitted, right? But then number two, to correct that data even after I submitted the form. So think about those things. And these are the success criteria, of course, that we're talking about here. Just to make sure that users understand what the errors are, have a chance to fix them either before they submit the form or to be able to undo and do it afterward. Okay, let's move along to user notification. So here we want to notify users of what's going on with their form. I think we've probably all had the experience of filling out a form online and then you click submit and then kind of nothing happens and you're like, well, did it go? Like, did that work? I don't know. So this is about making sure that users understand, was the form submitted successfully? Was there a problem? And giving them that chance to kind of fix it. So let's take a look at some different ways that we can do it. So once a form is submitted, we have to tell the user, was it successful or was there an error of some kind? And here are some of the different ways that we can do that. So we could use the main heading of the website, right, which is usually our H1 that's at the top of the page. We could put a note in there to say, hey, there was errors that need to be fixed in this form. Because users are going to come across that H1 pretty quickly as soon as the page loads. Or we could show them, hey, thanks for submitting your order. So in this case, we are assuming that this is synchronous form submission where I submit the form, the page refreshes, and maybe it refreshes and I stay on the page where I was, or maybe I submit the form and I go to a completely new page, right? I go to a special form confirmation page that says, success, your form was submitted, we'll get back to you within 24 hours or whatever, whatever your success message is. So in that case, using the main heading of the page that the user is going to land on after they submitted their form is a good place to give some information about what was the status of that form submission, right? Like, did we get your purchase? Are we going to send out the item you just ordered? Or did your credit card decline? Or did your address not validate? Or is the item out of stock? Or is there some other kind of problem? We can also use the page title. So this is the title tag that appears in the head section of the page. It is not visible anywhere on the page, but the text of a title tag is what appears on the tab in the browser. And it's also what appears if you bookmark the page. When you look at the page in your bookmarks, you'll see the page title there. So we can use that page title. If a user is using a screen reader, the page title gets read to them. This is the very first thing once that page loads. So they'll understand exactly where they are. And it's really helpful if, similar to example 1, where we used the main heading on the page, if we use the title on the page, again, it's the first thing that we kind of come across on the page, and it tells us what was the status. Was that form submission successful, or was that form submission not successful? So we can tell right away as soon as we land on the new page. Now here we have dialogues, and this is another way of letting a user know. And I think we have an example here where I click submit, and you can see that it opens that little window that says, thanks for submitting the form. Now, obviously, I didn't actually submit a form. This is just an example. But this is one thing that we could do if you're using asynchronous form submission. And we aren't actually refreshing the page and sending back a new page from the server. So this is an option that we have for that case. This can help us, again, to inform users of what happened. And this is how we would go about doing it. So we would have our submit button on the form, and then we would just attach an event listener with JavaScript to pop up an alert message. Another good approach is to list the errors that happened. So I actually don't see this terribly often online, but it is actually really helpful. And I do recommend it if you can make it work. If it's technically feasible with the platform or the CMS that you're using to build your website. If this is technically feasible, I do recommend it. So what this is it adds like a little box or a little section at the top of the form that has a list of all of the errors that are in the form. So this is an example of what that might look like. A little section at the top of the form that says, hey, there's 2 errors in this form. And then it explains what they are, right? It doesn't just say error. It explains very explicitly the first name field was left empty. It's a required field and it has to be filled in. And you notice that this is a link. It is a link that will take me directly to that first name field so that I can fill it in directly from this list. And then we also have the date field is in the wrong format. So here we're using not American style dates because there is no 17th month of the year. So this is September 17th, I guess, in the date format most of the rest of the world uses. All right. So, and then here's what our form looks like. I'm sorry, this is the actual markup of this error section here to show us that, we have our href, which is taking us to our first name field. And so the ID of my input is first name, and that's where I am linking to, right, is pound first name. So that will link directly there. And then you'll also notice that I have an ID of first name underscore error attached to this error. And when I look at my form input, I actually have this ARIA described by attribute here that refers back to that first name error. Why do we need both of those things? So let me explain. One is I want this one up at the top of the form because it's really nice to have a summary of all of the errors that happened on the form. And it's really nice to be able to click here and jump directly to the form field. However, I might just skip over this, right? I might not even notice that it's there. And I might just go back to I might just go straight down into the form, into this first name field. It's probably styled in some way that lets me know there's an error, right? It got a red border around it. It got a red background on it. It got some kind of icon next to it, right? There's probably something. There is ideally something, I guess I should say, there is ideally some kind of visual cue that there's a problem with that form field. And so if I just go directly to this form field, I'm not necessarily going to know that the error message that's telling me what's wrong is up here at the top of the page. But by having this ARIA described by here, I am now programmatically tying the text that appears. Sorry for all the scrolling up and down here. Let's see if I can get it on the screen at once. Okay. I'm referring back to this container here. And so all of the text that is nested inside of that container now becomes the description for this form field. So on this form field, I would hear the label read out. If I'm using a screen reader, I would hear first name, and then I would also hear the first name field is empty. It is a required field and must be filled in. So I would immediately understand that there's a problem with that field. We could also, of course, add an additional ARIA attribute here to let people know that this form field is invalid, and that is missing from this example, but we did see that in another section of the tutorial earlier on. The other option that we have is to do inline feedback. So if you don't want to do the summary at the top of the form, you can do inline feedback next to each input field. You could actually do both too. Like that's an option as well. It might be a bit much, but if it's a really long or really complex form, that might actually be helpful to have it in both places. All right, so inline feedback. What do we mean when we say inline feedback? And I feel like this is way more common online, and we've probably all seen this before, where I've submitted this form and there's some kind of problem, right? That I used a dot here instead of the slash that it was looking for. And so what I have here, now I wouldn't normally expect there to be the words okay and error kind of in front. It doesn't hurt anything, I guess, but that's definitely unusual. I don't think I've necessarily seen that before. But what I have seen before, right, is that there's a visual indicator that there's a problem here. I think it just occurred to me why they put those there. They put those there because otherwise they're using color alone to indicate the error, right? It's just the color of the text is the only thing that's telling me the difference. And of course, they're red and green, and we know that red-green color blindness is the most common form of color blindness. And so there's going to be a significant number of people who will not be able to tell the difference between the green text and the red text. So they have solved that problem by putting the okay text and the error text there. It's a little bit of an unusual approach, but it works. I think there are other things that you could do to communicate that information. They're kind of taking care of two things at once. So one is they're taking care of people who are colorblind who maybe can't perceive these two different colors by having that text cue there. And then they're also taking care of screen reader users, right? Screen reader users can't obviously see the color either. Well, that's a common assumption that all screen reader users are blind. We will say users who are blind, right, cannot distinguish between these two different colors. And so they would rely on a screen reader to announce to them that information. And this is one way of making that information available to be announced by a screen reader. So even though this is an unusual pattern, I do see why they are doing it. Are there other alternatives that would be equally as effective? Absolutely. So you don't have to follow this exact pattern, but you do want to make sure that if you are sharing information about which fields are okay and which ones have errors, that you have that information available in a way that doesn't use color, and that you also have that information available in a way that will be communicated to assistive technology. All right, so here we've made a mistake. We have an expiry date that has a wrong format, and we have an error message that's right here, right next to the form field. Having these error messages right there is really helpful because I don't have to wonder, right, like where is the error? I can see it. And let's take a look at how that gets marked up. Okay, so first we have our field that doesn't have an error, and we have a class of success that we're using presumably to style those. And we are including the word okay in the label text so that when a screen reader focuses that form field, they will hear okay username. And then we have the input type. And interestingly, we are also using an aria described by here to refer to this little check mark, which is an actual little check mark character. So not an emoji, but another type of ASCII character that's in there that lets us know that form submission was successful. All right, and then on our form that has an error, our form field rather, that has an error, we have a class of error, which I think is there just for CSS styling purposes. And again, inside the label, we have the error text. So if somebody was listening to this form with a screen reader, they would hear error expiry date. And then we have our input, and we have, again, our aria described by, which is referring to this span that includes the error message. So let me scroll back up for a second. So this is in a span with an ID, and it is programmatically associated to the form field with that aria described by attribute so that assistive technology understands that error message goes with that form field. If we don't programmatically associate it, it doesn't get read out by screen readers. They don't make that association between the error message and the form field. So that is an important thing to do. And it is one of the most common things that I see developers miss when they're programming forms. They will put the error message there, but it's not programmatically tied to the form field in any way. And then therefore, it's like it doesn't even exist. for users who can't see your error message. And then here's our sample CSS code. So it looks like those error and success classes were just there just for styling purposes. And this is an approach that we're doing after form submission. So we have clicked the submit button on the form, and then we're going to go back through and we're going to show inline any errors that happened on the form. Our second approach is during typing. So sometimes this is really helpful. We talked about it a little bit already. Other times it's just really annoying because you're getting an error message when you're just not done typing yet. It could be helpful, I guess, if you typed a character that's just not allowed, right? Like if usernames don't accept special characters and I typed an @ symbol or something in my username, if an error message popped up immediately to say, hey, that character's not allowed, that could actually be useful and helpful. If I am typing my phone number and I've got an error message popping up and saying, your phone number needs to be 10 characters. It's like, well, yeah, I know, but I just typed only 2 of them so far. So like, give me a second, right? That can get a little bit annoying. All right, so here we have an availability of a username that is checked instantly while the user is typing text. I wonder if this actually works. Let's see. Did they give me an example of... So they don't seem to actually give me a sample of a username that might be available. Okay, but there we go. I wonder if there's anything that actually shows up as taken in there, but that's okay. So you can kind of see that as soon as I start typing, it is going to tell me that that's okay. Again, that's a little bit annoying, right? Because it popped up before I was really done typing, right? So I probably don't mean to use just the letter U as my username, but it's already telling me, oh, that's okay, that's available. I feel like that could hold off for a little bit. We could calm down a little bit and let us know. Because here we have an ARIA Live region, right, that is set to polite, which means that any text that gets added inside the span, any text that gets dynamically added with JavaScript inside that span is going to be read out to screen readers, but in a polite way, which means that if the screen reader is in the middle of doing something else, it won't get interrupted to read this. So if I'm in the middle of typing, typically a screen reader is going to read the text that you're typing. So if I'm typing user123, right, as I type, I'm going to hear user123 so that I can confirm as the user that I'm typing the characters I think I am, and my fingers aren't on the wrong keys. So I'm in the middle of doing that, right? I'm in the middle of typing. I'm hearing the characters I'm typing. So I wouldn't want to be interrupted to be told that username is available, right? I would want to wait until I stopped typing and the screen reader stopped reading to me before that happened. So these ARIA Live regions are another thing that gets coded incorrectly pretty often. So let me just talk about that for a second. What you want to do, so you notice that this is a span and it's empty. It's just sitting on the page empty. It doesn't have any text in it. And that is how you want to code an ARIA Live region. It has to be on the page already. You can't add it later. So you have to have an empty container. It doesn't have to be a span. It could be a div. It could be another tag, whatever is appropriate for your use case. And you want to give it the ARIA Live attribute, and it can be polite or assertive. And I feel like there's one more. We can look it up. We'll figure it out. But polite means it's not going to interrupt something else that's already going on. If it's assertive, it will interrupt other things that are going on. It means that I think this is important enough that I need to bring it to the user's attention immediately and interrupt whatever they're doing. You need to be really thoughtful and careful about that, because obviously that could become very annoying and could hurt the usability of your application. So then we have a big chunk of JavaScript here that is basically listening for the key up event as we're typing into our username field. So every time we type a character, this is going to fire. And I am going to, let's see, we have a set error, we have a set success. We're not going to dig into, this isn't a JavaScript lesson, so I'm not going to dig into this code in any great detail. But I am just kind of hoping to show, oh yeah, here we are, inner HTML. So this is where we're actually setting the text of that, of this ARIA Live region, which we can see has a username of username_feedback. And so here we are, username_feedback. We're setting the text. We're either emptying it out. We're going to empty it out, and username feedback parent node class name. We're taking off the class, so we must be adding a class to it at some point. And we're going to look for a strong tag. Where do we have a strong tag? We're going to add a strong tag. Must be adding a strong tag in here somewhere. Oh yeah. Oh no, that's querying. Well, anyway, not a JavaScript lesson. We'll just say this JavaScript is updating the text that's inside this ARIA Live region, so that we can understand kind of as we're typing, we're going to get that user message popping up to let us know this username is available. All right. So then this is telling us, it doesn't give us a lot of information about live regions. So I think it's good that we talked about that for a second. That's another thing that we could do a live stream on, is figuring out ARIA Live regions, because they do have some little things that you have to keep in mind, I guess, to keep them working. All right, so example 1 was just binary messages, yes or no. Something is right or it's wrong. Then we have scaled feedback, which would be something like the strength of a password, which is, I see, is exactly the example that they have here. So this is where my feedback isn't either yes, it's correct, or no, it's wrong. It's, hey, this is a 50% strong password, or this is a 90% strong password. So if I type the word password, it gets a really bad score, right? If I use this little hack, let's see if it's smart enough. Nope, it recognizes that as also a really strong password. If I just type a bunch of random characters in there, now we have a really strong password. And it's also, I guess, telling me how long it's going to take to crack that password. Let's see, cracked in centuries. Wow, okay. Okay. So we do have a separate code, but again, this isn't a JavaScript lesson, so I think we're not going to dig into that. But we would use a very similar markup mechanism where we're going to use an ARIA Live region, and we're going to update the content of that live region as the user types to let them know if their password is strong or weak or medium. All right. So those are kind of as we're typing. We also have on focus change. So instead of running validation kind of as we type, which can get a little bit annoying, we've already talked about it, here we're going to wait until the user actually moves on to the next form field. So instead of firing instead of that checker firing every time we type a character, now it's only going to fire once we're done with the field. So here's an example where I'm expected to, whoops, I was trying to tab out of it and it tabbed right down the page. All right, so you can see I didn't use the correct format. They wanted me to use a slash and it has a dot. And so I got an error message here that didn't show up until I tabbed out of the field. And so you can see that if I erase that, the error message doesn't go away, because that's not going to fire until I tab. And I kind of wish they had put something a little closer. And that's also invalid. So I left that invalid. So if I type that and now I hit tab, now I have an okay message. So that one was okay. It was acceptable. So you can see that that didn't fire while I was typing the number it waited until I was completely done with the field and tabbed or clicked somewhere else. I guess that's another option that I could do, is that I could just click over here to move focus out of that field. I was just really stuck in keyboard mode. So as soon as we kind of indicate we're done with that field, we've moved focus on, either we've hit the tab key or we've clicked the mouse on the next field, we've moved on, that's when we're going to get this error message showing up. So again, we have, we are putting the error in, oh, that's what that strong was for, is that it's putting that error or okay at the beginning of the label that we saw in the other JavaScript. Sorry, that just clicked in my head. All right, so we have this empty strong tag here where we're going to put either okay or error, depending on whether or not the information entered in the field was correct or not. The rest of the label stays the same, right? That doesn't change. This field is always going to be for the expiration date. It's not going to change into being your first name or something all of a sudden. All right, then we have an input type text. It has an ID of expire, and that's how we're associating the label programmatically with the form field. The value is just what is filled in by default when we load the page. And then we have our ARIA described by, which is referring to EXP DESC3. Sorry. And we see that that's the ID of this ARIA live region. So any text that we add into this ARIA live region now becomes the description for this form field. So it's programmatically associated. So not only is it going to be read out by a screen reader, and this is assertive, and we made it assertive instead of polite because we're done with the form field. We're not interrupting something else. So we'll go ahead and make this assertive to make sure that the screen reader reads it out as soon as text fills into this span, that will get read out by the screen reader. All right, so we're programmatically tying that error message to the form field, and we also have it wrapped in an ARIA live region that is marked as assertive. So it is going to immediately announce, hey, there's a problem with that form field you just filled out. You might want to go back and fix that. All right, we have our related resources. Let's go ahead and move along to multi-page forms. Okay, if we have really, really long forms, it is really helpful and a really good idea to actually break those apart into multiple pages so that you have a less intimidating set of fields in front of you, and you can just focus on, okay, I just have to fill out these 10 fields. It also gives you a chance as a developer to save progress on the form, which you could do if it's all together on one page, but it's a little bit trickier, right? Because you're going to have to use JavaScript, you're going to have to use Ajax, you're going to have to be constantly sending back the data that the user has entered to the backend asynchronously. It can be done, but it's a little bit tricky. Where if we actually break the form up across multiple pages, and then basically that process of moving from page 1 to page 2 is a form submission of page 1, it goes to the backend, it gets saved in the database, everything is safe. The user could come back later and pick up where they left off pretty easily. So that's one nice advantage of the multi-page forms. I think they're also a little easier for people to understand and get through when it's not, they don't have to scroll down 10, 20 screens to see all of a form that they're filling in. That's definitely, it's intimidating, and it can be difficult to keep track of where you are and wait, didn't that other section already ask me about that? And it's just a little bit of a nicer way to make your way through it. So one thing that we do want to do if we're using a multi-page form is we want to indicate progress. So we want users to understand where they are in the overall process of filling out this form. So this is going to be very similar to our user notifications, where we just want to, after we've submitted the page, we want users to understand that something has changed, that something has happened. So here you can see we're using the page title, which is, again, the title tag that's in the head of the section. It is not visible anywhere on the page itself, but it is text that shows up on the tab in the browser window, right? So this multi-page form forms, pipe character, web accessibility initiative, etc., is the title that's in the head section of this page. And that's where it shows up, is on the tab of the browser. It is also the very first thing that gets read to screen reader users when they land on a new page. So it's instant understanding of exactly where we are. All right, so we're using the page title. And here you can see the example is we're on step 2 of 4. So we want to explain not just that we're on step 2, but how many steps there are total, so I understand where I am in that overall process. And then what's the name of this step, right? We're collecting my shipping address, and I'm in the middle of completing a purchase, right? So this step is shipping address. The overall form is I'm completing a purchase, and it's Galactic Teddy Bear Shop, which that sounds amazing. I would love to have a galactic teddy bear. So we're buying a galactic teddy bear. We're in the middle of completing the purchase. We're filling out our shipping address, which is the second step in the process. We can get all of that information from just this one line. And now we understand exactly where we are. So if I have to step away from the computer and go do something else and come back, I can see exactly where I am. My memory is refreshed, and I don't have to wonder and try to figure out, what is this? Why is it asking me for my address? I already know. Okay, approach number 2 is using the main heading. So very similar to the user notifications, but they did it in the opposite order. Did you notice? They used main heading and then page title last time, and they flipped it this time. You definitely want to use both approaches. So here we're saying shipping address, step 2 of 4. We're already going to know that we're in the middle of the purchase process and that we're purchasing a galactic teddy bear from the page title. So we'll be able to tell from that. Presumably there's also the site name and the logo and things like that on the page as well. Another approach that we could use the HTML progress element. Again, a semantic native HTML element that lets us display progress through a process. We don't have to add any JavaScript. We don't have to worry about accessibility because it is a native semantic HTML element. And here's how it can work. This is what the markup would look like. We set a max number and we set what our current value is. So here we're on step 1 of 7. We're on step 2 of 7. We're on step 6 of 7. We're on step 7 of 7. And you can see that we can put text inside of here. Okay, and that's what will get read out as the text content of that element. Okay, and then here's some CSS. We can style the progress bar to look however we would like. So if you're looking at that and going, that design isn't going to work for my site, you can adjust it. It's all adjustable with CSS. You can make it look however you would like. You can use whatever colors you would like, whatever border styles you would like. You can make this fit in with whatever your design happens to be. All right. Another approach that we could use is a step-by-step indicator. And I feel like this is probably more common than the progress indicator. I feel like I see this one quite a lot, right? Where we see a stepper going across the top of the page, and we can see where we are. We can see what the steps before where we are, the steps after where we are. We have an indication that we're on the current page, right? So here we have a little check mark letting us know the billing address is complete. And we have this kind of bold style that's letting us know this is our current page. And then these look a little grayed out, right? Indicating that they're future steps. Now, there's something weird going on with the vertical alignment here. That's just some CSS that needs to be fixed. That's not, that's not saying that that's what this needs to look like. The handy thing about this approach is that if I realize like, oh, wait, did I remember to put my apartment number on my billing address, right? I can click, well, if it was a real web page, I can click there to go back to it, right? Now, you typically can't click ahead because you do have to go through the steps in order, right? And the way that I'm going to get to step 3 review order is by finishing everything on step 2 and then clicking next. So it is pretty common that you can't skip ahead, right? Like you just can't skip ahead to finish purchase. You have to actually make your payment first. right? So that's pretty typical. But then having these links that I can go back to steps where maybe I need to double check, or maybe I just want to take a look at what I entered there or change. Maybe I changed my mind. Like, oh, I'm going to use a different credit card. So let me go back to the billing address and update the billing address there. So that's really helpful. All right. And here we are. Here are our WCAG resources. These are the rules that we're talking about, and all of the techniques that apply. So let's take a look at custom controls. So this is where we're going to get into semantic HTML, I think, a little bit. So we do have lots of new fancy, relatively new HTML elements like progress bars and range sliders and date pickers and things like that in HTML that we can use native semantic HTML elements for accomplishing those things. But of course, the native controls still don't cover every possible case of what you may need to do in the UI. So let's take a look at some of the things that we need to keep in our minds, when we do need to build some kind of custom interactive component, right? And what we're going to take a look at here is a share button, which is very common on the web, but of course there's no native semantic share button, and also a star rating. There's no native semantic star rating element. So let's take a look at how we can put those together in a way that ensures that they're accessible and they work for everybody. All right, so first we have a share button. And it's going to do two different things. It's going to tell me how many people have already shared this content, and also obviously let people share it. So once I click on it, it's going to let me share. And we're going to wrap that in a form element because that is going to enable some form shortcuts that are available in assistive technology to work on our button. So keep that in mind, especially if you're working on single page apps. This step tends to get left out because if you're working in Vue or React, those platforms don't strictly require you to use form tags wrapped around your form elements, but it is very helpful if you actually do, because then the browser actually recognizes them fully as form elements and enables screen reader users, for example, to trigger forms mode for interacting with your forms as they would normally expect to be able to do. So we are going to wrap this in a form. We're going to make it a submit button actually of this form. And we have our count of how many shares that we've had. And we're going to have some JavaScript, which again, this isn't a JavaScript lesson today, so we're not going to dig into this in any great detail, but we're basically going to listen for somebody to click on this, and then we're going to share the content, whatever that happens to mean in this particular context, right? If I'm already on a social media site, like sharing could just mean I'm reposting it from my own account. If I'm on somebody else's website, sharing it could mean I'm taking it from that website, right, and posting it to some social media account that I own. And there's all different kinds of things that could mean as well, right? It could mean I'm emailing it to somebody. It could mean I'm directly sending it to somebody in some kind of way, through a platform or through a particular app that I happen to be using, maybe. So there's lots of different things that sharing could mean, depending on the context. And exactly what that is isn't really important here. What's important here is that we're just making sure that we've got a form, we have a button, a submit button, and we're going to be listening for that click on that button, or we could listen for a submission on the form, either one. And then we're going to carry out whatever activities it is that we need to do in this particular case to share this bit of content. All right, so that would be the correct markup for that. Now, does it have to look exactly like this button? Absolutely not. You can make that look however you would like. You can use CSS to remove the background entirely. You can use CSS to change the background color, to add a gradient, to add borders, to add glow around it, add icons, do whatever you like. You can make it look however you want. with CSS. So you have a lot of flexibility in what it can look like, but under the hood, it can still be a semantic HTML element that people are going to be able to interact with in the way that they expect. All right, let's take a look at the star rating, which I'm sure we've all seen this on so many different websites, right? So in this case, we want to pick somewhere between 1 and 5 stars. And I guess that's going to let us clear it. Yeah. So that's our clear button. So again, not the prettiest design, right? You can make this look however you would like. You want the stars to be yellow or pink or whatever color you want. You want them to maybe not be stars. Maybe you want them to be hearts or lightning bolts, or they could be anything. So visually, this could look any way that you want, right? The important thing is what is the code that's under the hood? So in this case, this is a set of radio buttons, which makes sense because when we think about the functionality of a star rating, we basically have 5 options and we can only choose one. Right? Most platforms don't let us say 3.5 stars. So our choice is, are we giving it 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5 stars? So under the hood, not visually, but under the hood, this is going to be a set of radio buttons. And let's take a look at our code. So we have it again wrapped in a form element because we have radio buttons and we want them to reliably act like radio buttons for everybody in every circumstance. So we're going to wrap a form tag around them. We have an input with a value of 0, which is I think that's our X actually. I think is actually 0 stars. Oh, so we actually have 6 choices. We actually have 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in this particular form. You can adjust that. Maybe you only want to allow 1 through 3. You can do it however you would like. Maybe you just want yes or no, right? Like a YouTube style, like thumbs up or thumbs down. You can do it however you would like. So we have an input type radio with a value. It has a label, of course, associated with it. And we can see that we have this visually hidden CSS class, which that CSS class, let's see if they have it down here. Visually hidden. They do not have it on this page. It was in part 1 of this video. They did have a sample of what that visually hidden class looked like. It's basically just CSS that takes that little bit of text and makes it visually invisible, but still available for assistive technology to read out on the page. So you can't just set display to none or visibility to hidden because most screen readers will skip over that text entirely. So there's some other CSS wizardry that has to happen to make that so that you can't see it, but it is actually still on the page and is still detectable to screen readers. So that's what that CSS class is doing. And we have a 0 stars rating so that when I tab through this page and my focus lands on this first radio button, I will know, oh, this is a radio button for selecting 0 stars as the rating. 1 star, 2 stars, 3 stars, 4 stars, 5 stars, etc. So I will understand that. And then we have, they're using an SVG here. You could do this in a lot of different ways. An SVG is definitely one of them. You could also have images there. You could have just a CSS style. We have the text inside the label already, so that gives you a lot of flexibility with what you do with the actual graphic that displays there. Okay, and then we have our input value of 1 with, again, our hidden label of 1 star. We have 2 star, 3 star, 4 star, 5 star. And then we have our submit button for submitting our rating. So we're done. We're going to submit our rating. And then we have this output, which is going to show us what our rating was. Okay, and then they have an example of how they styled with CSS. Again, that's really, really flexible. You are not locked into it looking exactly like that. You can make it look however you would like. once you have that markup in place. And then we have a sample of the JavaScript, which is the JavaScript is what's making sure that, sorry, this is so much scrolling. Let me go back up here. Okay. So you notice that when I go to, right, when I click 3 stars, the other ones look like they are also checked. Where obviously, if I have a list of 6 radio buttons and I check the third one, right, the first 2 don't get checked. That's not something that typically happens. So there's some JavaScript and CSS happening that's making those look like they're all filled in and like we've selected the first 3 stars. Now, what's actually happening is that this particular radio button is selected and nothing else is. That's what's happening in the HTML. But we're making it look like we picked a 3-star rating in the way that we would normally expect that to look. So let's go back down to the JavaScript there. And you can see here's where we're updating that output for the text content and saying how many stars you voted for. And it's not a JavaScript lesson, so we're not going to dig into this in any great detail, but we're basically listening for a selection to be made on those radio buttons. And then we're running the code to actually update the value and make sure that that displays the way that we would normally expect. And we've got some fancy CSS selector in there, making sure that all of the stars up to the point that we selected are getting that style so that they look like they're also selected. So when you have to build a custom control, you do want to give some thought to what should the semantic HTML under that control be. It probably shouldn't be divs and spans. It should probably be a button tag. It depends on exactly what you're doing, right? But chances are it should be a button or it should contain buttons. So an example would be a carousel, which I can see actually we have a carousel tutorial on here next. Right, where a carousel would have buttons as part of it, right? My next and previous buttons, for example, on a carousel. But I would want to make sure that those were button tags and not just divs or spans that I would be clicking to go to the next part of the carousel. So you want to give some thought to that. Like, what are the semantic HTML elements? Maybe a button. If it's taking me off somewhere else, I'm going to a different place on the current page, or I'm going to a different page altogether, then it should probably be a link tag. Otherwise, it should probably be some kind of form element under the hood. Checkboxes and radio buttons get used a lot if I'm just selecting things, like the star rating, for example. Right? That's just radio buttons under the hood. It doesn't look anything like radio buttons, but it is, that is how it gets marked up. And then that's how we ensure that it works with assistive technology and it works with keyboard. And it has all of the interactions that a user would expect for it to have. And that's how we do that. So we want to use semantic native HTML elements wherever we can, even when we are building some kind of custom interaction component. At the very least, I would say if you have no other semantic HTML element in a custom component, you should probably have at least one button in there, because probably there is something happening when somebody clicks on something, and the best way to capture that would be to use a button tag. So that's another thing that we could do in a future live stream. If you're interested in that, you can just leave a comment and let me know that, yeah, I want to dig into how do I build custom components and make sure that they work, make sure that they're accessible, and how do I apply all of those scary looking ARIA attributes to them to make sure that they're working and that they function as expected for everybody. So that's something that we could definitely talk about in the future. So that is like so professional of me to almost exactly hit the time for 1 hour on this stream. So I did not do that on purpose. It is sheer coincidence, but here we are. All right, so I'm leaning toward maybe doing semantic HTML of some kind or another. It could be custom components, or it could just be, correctly marking up a form or correctly marking up a screen of an app or something like that. We could talk about that next time. If you have any preferences, just leave a comment for me on YouTube or on LinkedIn, and I read every comment, and I'll take those into consideration for future streams. But for now, thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you have had a beautiful summer and that you have beautiful weather wherever you are. And I will see you again 2 weeks from today.